Have you ever wondered what it's like to die? To leave behind everything you've ever known, only to return with a message that could change everything? What if you were given a glimpse of something beyond this world? Something so profound, so terrifying, that you couldn't keep it to yourself? This is the story of a woman who came back from death itself, carrying a message from Jesus that left her shaken to the core. It's a message so urgent, so haunting, that she feels compelled to share it with all of us. Let's listen her story. Margaret Bennett never imagined that she would return from death at the age of 70. In fact, no one does. But somehow, against all odds, here she was, alive, breathing, speaking, when by all accounts, she should have passed into eternity. Margaret's story begins in the most ordinary way, as her life, like everyone's, took an unexpected turn. Struck by a mysterious illness that seemed to come out of nowhere, her health rapidly deteriorated, leaving doctors bewildered and unable to pinpoint the cause. As her condition worsened, her daughter, Susan, rushed her to the hospital, gripping her hand desperately in the ambulance. "Hang on, Mom," she whispered through trembling lips, her voice barely audible over the sirens. Susan's frantic pace was matched by the clumsy, anxious driving of her son, Ethan, who trailed behind in his old, beat-up car. The tension was palpable, but there was something much larger than all of them pulling at Margaret. A force she couldn't fight, an inevitable pull into something beyond life itself. Then, just as suddenly as the darkness began to take her, it enveloped her entirely. What happened next could never be explained by science, nor could it be dismissed by disbelief. For when Margaret opened her eyes again, she found herself bathed in a light unlike anything she had ever known. It wasn't the sunlight, nor was it anything earthly. It was a blinding, warm, and eternal light, alive, and it wrapped around her like a soft embrace, filling her with a peace that transcended all understanding. And then she saw him. In that moment, Margaret stood before Jesus, face to face with the very embodiment of divinity. His eyes saw through her, into her heart, her soul, her very being. His voice wasn't just heard, it reverberated deep within her, shaking her to her core. He showed her things she wished she could forget, but could never unsee. He showed her the world as it was, and as it was destined to be. But before she could process the weight of it all, it was over. Just as quickly as she had arrived, Margaret was sent back, forced to return to a world that felt distant, foreign, and painfully real. She awoke in her hospital bed, the sounds of hushed voices and the mechanical beeps of machines filling the room. Susan, her eyes swollen from crying, was gripping her hand tightly, but her head was bowed in prayer. Ethan stood behind her, pale and still, while Caleb, her other grandson, stared out the window, avoiding the scene entirely. The nurses were speaking in quiet tones, one of them flicking off the monitors. They had declared her dead. And then, without warning, Margaret gasped. A sharp intake of air so sudden that it made Susan scream in terror. She jolted back, nearly knocking over her chair. Ethan stumbled, knocking a tray of medical instruments to the floor. Caleb spun around, his face as white as a ghost. "Mom," Susan stammered, her voice shaking as she grabbed the edge of Margaret's bed. Margaret tried to smile, but her body still felt sluggish, heavy, like she was emerging from a deep, unnatural sleep. Yet, despite the exhaustion, she forced the words out. "I'm back. she whispered hoarsely, her throat dry from the journey between worlds. The room exploded into chaos. Nurses shouted for the doctor. One dropped her clipboard, the sound echoing like thunder through the room. Moments later, Dr. Reynolds rushed in, his face contorted with disbelief. This isn't possible, he muttered, his eyes scanning the machines, looking for a logical explanation. But there was no explanation. Margaret was alive, and she knew it. Susan's face was a mixture of joy and fear. What? How? Mom, you were gone. You were gone. I know, Margaret replied, her voice growing stronger now. But I've been sent back. There's something I need to tell you. Susan's expression changed, confusion flashing across her face. Sent back? What are you talking about? Margaret took a deep breath, her eyes locking onto Susan's with a sense of urgency she couldn't suppress. I saw him, Susan. I saw Jesus. The words hung heavy in the room, and Susan's mouth hung open in disbelief. But Margaret wasn't finished. And he sent me back with a message. It's not just for me. It's for the whole world. Susan's face was a mixture of shock and skepticism, but Margaret was resolute. And it's about Elon Musk, she added, her words hanging in the air like a bombshell, ready to explode. Susan's eyes widened, her lips parted, but no sound came out. Ethan, standing behind her, furrowed his brow, already skeptical of what his grandmother was saying. But Margaret knew one thing for certain. She had returned from the other side, not for her, but for all of them. There was something they needed to hear, something the world needed to know before it was too late. Elon Musk? Ethan repeated, his voice thick with disbelief, as if Margaret had just uttered something absurd. Yes, she answered, her tone unwavering, her voice carrying the weight of something far beyond this world. He showed me things, Ethan. Things about the future, about humanity's choices. And Elon Musk, he's at the center of it all. Caleb shifted uneasily by the window, his hand rubbing the back of his neck as he processed the words. Susan blinked rapidly, struggling to make sense of what her mother was saying. The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the distant beeping of machines somewhere in the hallway. Margaret could see the confusion, the hope, and the doubt flickering across their faces. But there was no denying the certainty in her eyes, the absolute conviction that what she had experienced was real. I don't expect you to understand, she said, her voice softer now, but firm with urgency. But you need to listen. This message isn't just for me. It's for all of us. Jesus showed me what's coming, and Elon Musk is at a crossroads. Susan finally spoke, her voice trembling. Mom, you've just been through so much. Maybe this is just a dream, or a hallucination. Margaret didn't let her finish. I know what you're thinking, she interrupted, her voice growing stronger with each word. That it's a dream, or that I'm imagining it. But I'm telling you, this is real. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. The doctor, who had been standing quietly in the corner, made a move to speak, but Margaret raised a hand, silencing him. Please, she pleaded, her eyes searching their faces. Just listen. This isn't about whether or not you believe me. It's about what's coming. We have to be ready. As Margaret looked at each of them, Susan, Ethan, Caleb, the nurses, even the skeptical doctor, she could feel the weight of her words sinking in. Whether they believed her or not didn't matter. They could all sense that something extraordinary had happened. The world had shifted, and they were standing on the precipice of something vast and unknowable. And this was only the beginning. Margaret's mind drifted back to the moment she had left her body, to the experience she had struggled to put into words since waking up. It wasn't like falling asleep or fading away into the dark. One moment, she felt the weight of her body giving way, the slow pull of years and illness dragging her down like an anchor. And the next, she was light as a feather, soaring upwards, freed from the confines of the world she had known. The stillness around her was almost eerie at first, but the quiet wasn't empty. It was full, brimming with an energy she couldn't quite describe. There was light everywhere, bright, golden, yet not blinding. It surrounded her, embracing her, warm and comforting, as though it recognized her, as though it knew her. This wasn't the artificial, sterile light of a hospital room, nor the warm glow of a sunrise. This light was alive, pulsing with purity and holiness. As it touched her, all the pain, fear, and heaviness of her life melted away. She felt no confusion, no fear. She simply was, and it was perfect. As she was drawn forward, whether she moved of her own accord or was pulled, she couldn't tell. She began to see shapes forming in the distance. The light grew brighter, more vivid, and suddenly she realized it wasn't just light, it was a place. Rolling hills, golden fields, rivers shimmering like liquid crystal. Everything seemed to hum with a kind of music, but it wasn't music as she knew it. It wasn't coming from a source. It was simply there, woven into the very fabric of this place. Colors she had never seen before swirled around her, vibrant and impossible to describe. And then she felt it. A presence. Not just any presence. It was him. Jesus. At first, she didn't see him, but she knew he was there. She could feel him, like the warmth of the sun on her skin, or the first embrace of someone you love. His presence filled her with an overwhelming sense of peace and love. But there was something else, something heavier that pressed against the joy of this place. Something deep and aching, sorrow. And then, there he was. Jesus stood before her, not like the distant pale figure in the paintings or the statues. He was radiant, glowing with a light that wasn't just physical. It was spiritual, eternal. But his eyes, those eyes, they carried a depth she could hardly comprehend. They were kind, but they also saw everything, every thought, every deed, every secret she had ever held in her heart. His gaze wasn't condemning, though it was honest, loving, but truthful. It was as though he could see her entire soul all at once, and yet, despite everything, he still loved her. She couldn't describe what that felt like. It was humbling, overwhelming, freeing. Then he spoke, not with words, but with something deeper, something that transcended language. Margaret was standing on the edge of something she couldn't fully understand, yet she knew that her journey wasn't over. The message she carried wasn't just for her. It was for the whole world. And Elon Musk was at the heart of it all. What he chose to do next would shape the future of humanity, for better or for worse. Margaret had barely arrived in the afterlife when she felt Jesus' voice surround her, resonating deep within her being. "Margaret," he called, and the sound of her name brought her to her knees. His words were clear, and they left no room for doubt. "You are here for a moment, but your work is not done. I am sending you back." Stunned, Margaret wanted to protest, to cling to the peace and perfection of the place she had just entered. But Jesus continued, "There is a message you must deliver, a message for the world. As his words echoed in her mind, visions began flooding her consciousness. Images, sounds, and feelings too vast to process. She saw Earth spinning in the vastness of space, beautiful but fragile. She saw humanity, busy, distracted, rushing toward an uncertain future. There was light, innovation, and promise, but also creeping shadows, greed, corruption, and a dangerous reliance on things humanity couldn't control. Then one name stood out: Elon Musk. Margaret saw him clearly, standing at the center of it all, surrounded by towering structures, machines, and pathways leading to the stars. He was both a creator and a destroyer, a man with immense power and influence, teetering on the edge of two fates, one of creation, the other of destruction. Jesus' voice came again, sorrowful and steady. He is at a crossroads. The choices he makes will shape not just this world, but worlds to come. Margaret was confused. Why Elon Musk? What made him so important? But Jesus showed her more. The technologies Musk was creating, spaceships hurtling toward distant planets, machines that could think and feel, and wires connecting human minds to computers. These weren't just inventions. They were tools that could elevate humanity or sever it from its soul. Pray for him, Jesus urged. Pray for the choices he will make, for the enemy seeks to use his brilliance against him. Margaret felt the weight of his words settle on her, heavy and undeniable. She wanted to ask questions, to understand more, but she couldn't speak. The visions kept coming. One Earth, vibrant and alive, where technology and faith harmonized. The other, cold and lifeless, dominated by machines, stripped of humanity. The contrast was stark, and the message was clear. The future hung in the balance. Tell them, Jesus said gently but firmly. Tell them what you have seen. Tell them to pray, to guide, and to hope. This path is not set in stone. There is still time. Before she could protest, the light began to fade. The music, the warmth, the colors, all of it slipped away, and Margaret felt herself being pulled back down, away from that perfect place. Then darkness. The next thing she knew, she was gasping for air, her daughter Susan screaming, and the hospital room crashing back around her. Despite the confusion of her surroundings, the message Jesus had given her burned within her, etched into her soul. She had returned for a reason. The world needed to hear it. Susan, sitting beside her, was bewildered. Ethan and Caleb stood nearby, their faces pale with shock. Dr. Reynolds, skeptical and arms crossed, hovered in the background. Nurses whispered uncertainly. Margaret's voice trembled, but she spoke with conviction. I know this is hard to understand. I know it sounds impossible, but I saw Jesus. I stood before him, and he gave me a message. One the world needs to hear. Susan tried to smile, but it was weak. Mom, you've been through a lot. Maybe this is just your mind trying to make sense of things. Margaret squeezed her hand. It's not my mind, Susan. I'm not confused. I'm not crazy. This is real. He spoke to me, and he sent me back for a reason. Ethan, his voice nervous, let out a small laugh. Grandma, you're saying you saw Jesus, and that he sent you back with a message for us? For the world? Margaret nodded, her eyes fierce with determination. The future depended on the choices people made, choices that could change everything. And she was the messenger. Ethan's skepticism was evident as he stopped himself, his brow furrowed. That's a lot to take in, he said. Margaret looked directly at him, her gaze steady. I know you don't believe me, Ethan, but you will. She replied calmly, "You have to listen. This isn't about me. It's about all of us." Jesus had shown her what was coming, something far bigger than anything anyone could imagine. Caleb, who had been silent up until then, shifted uncomfortably by the window. "You mentioned Elon Musk," he said quietly, his voice uncertain. "Why would Jesus talk about him? He's just a guy who builds rockets and electric cars, right?" Margaret's voice grew firm. "He's not just a guy. He's at the center of something much bigger than himself. Jesus showed me a future where his decisions shape the destiny of humanity. He has the power to create or destroy, to lead us towards salvation or ruin. And right now, he's standing at a crossroads." The room fell silent. Even Dr. Reynolds, who had been checking her vitals, paused and listened. Margaret could feel the weight of their attention, disbelief mixed with intrigue. It didn't matter if they believed her. What mattered was that they heard her. "He showed me a vision," she continued. "He showed me the earth as it is now and how it could be. Humanity's progress, our technology, our achievements, but also the dangers we've created for ourselves. Elon Musk is at the heart of it all. His work with artificial intelligence, space exploration, and neural technology. These are tools that could either save us or destroy us. The choices he makes in the coming years will determine which path we take." Susan frowned, her confusion clear. "Mom, why Elon Musk? Why him, of all people? He's just one man." "Exactly," Margaret replied, her voice steady. "Because he's not just one man anymore. He's a symbol of our future. Jesus said his work is reshaping the world. What he does next will affect all of humanity." "But he's human, like the rest of us," she added. "He needs guidance. He needs our prayers." Ethan shook his head, struggling to understand. "I get it. He's important. But what difference does praying for him make? He's a scientist, not a prophet." Margaret leaned forward, her frail body straining. "That's where you're wrong. Musk doesn't need to be a prophet to change the world. The enemy is watching him, trying to twist his brilliance into something dark. Jesus showed me that he's brilliant but vulnerable. He needs our prayers to stay on the right path." Dr. Reynolds, who had been silent, spoke up cautiously. "Mrs. Bennett, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but near-death experiences often lead to visions." "I wasn't near death, Doctor," Margaret interrupted sharply. "I was dead. This wasn't a hallucination. It was real." Dr. Reynolds fell silent, and the room grew still, the only sound the faint beep of the heart monitor. Susan sighed deeply. "Even if this is real, what can we do? We're just ordinary people." "By spreading the message," Margaret said simply. "By praying, not just for Musk, but for the world. This isn't just about one man. It's about all of us. Technology isn't the enemy. It's a tool. We have to make sure we use it for good, but we must act now." Ethan, his skepticism softening into curiosity, asked, "What did these futures look like?" Margaret hesitated. In one future, the earth was vibrant, full of life. Technology worked with nature and faith. People used their innovations to heal, to connect. But in the other future, her voice faltered. It was empty. Machines ruled, and humanity became a shadow. No love, no faith, just cold efficiency. Caleb shuddered. "And you think Elon Musk can choose between those futures?" "I know he can," Margaret said, "and so can we. Our prayers, our choices, they matter." The weight of her words lingered. Doubt was still in their eyes, but something else, a spark of belief, was starting to grow. It had to be enough. In the days that followed, word of Margaret's survival and experience spread quickly. Susan stayed by her side, and Ethan and Caleb came often, their curiosity growing. They asked questions, some challenging, others hesitant. "Grandma," Ethan asked one evening, "if what you saw is real, why you? Why would Jesus choose you to deliver a message about someone like Elon Musk?" Margaret smiled faintly. "Because I'm not anyone special. That's the point. This message isn't about me. It's about all of us. Jesus chooses based on faith, not status." Caleb frowned. "But why Musk? There are so many powerful people in the world." "Because his work is different," Margaret replied. "Jesus showed me that Musk's tools, AI, space exploration, neural tech, could shape the future in ways we don't fully understand yet. And he's at a crossroads," she continued. "The decisions he makes now will ripple through everything." Susan, still doubtful, asked softly, "How can we know if any of this is real?" Margaret didn't blame her. Even she struggled to understand the enormity of what had happened. But then, the signs began. The first was subtle. The lights in her kitchen flickered in a steady, rhythmic pattern. Then, a small bird appeared on the windowsill, staring at her before chirping and flying off. The next was harder to ignore. The television, turned off, suddenly blared to life. Static filled the screen, but beneath it, a faint, urgent voice crackled. Susan jumped to her feet, asking, "What's happening?" Margaret couldn't answer. The voice was garbled, but its urgency was unmistakable. Then just as quickly, the screen went dark. "Mom, what's going on?" Susan asked, pale. "I don't know," Margaret admitted, "but I think it's connected to the message." The strange occurrences grew more frequent. Lights flickered in deliberate patterns, sounds echoed through the house, and the weather shifted unpredictably. Every night, Margaret dreamed of Musk standing at the crossroads. Ethan was the first to notice. "Grandma, these things happen whenever you talk about the message. Have you noticed?" Margaret nodded. Someone, or something, is trying to interfere. Susan looked skeptical, but didn't argue. "So what do we do?" "We can't stop it," Margaret said, "but we have to keep going. The message has to get out." With Ethan and Caleb's help, Margaret's story began to spread. Responses were mixed. Some people were moved, others mocked her. But slowly, the conversation began to grow. One morning, a letter arrived from a young woman named Maria. Margaret's story had reignited her faith, reminding her that even in a world dominated by technology, there was still love, light, and purpose. Tears filled Margaret's eyes as she read the letter. This was why she had been sent back, not to change the world alone, but to remind others that together they had the power to shape the future. If you or someone you know has had a near-death experience and received such a message, would you be willing to share it with the rest of the world? Please comment and let us know. Thank you for your listening.